Today we're going to be talking about the condo and co-op buying process. Many of the steps that are in this process are going to be similar to that of buying a single or multifamily house. There's just a little more complication and a little bit more that goes into condos and co-ops. And that's why we kind of separate out those two different things, right? And again, it all really boils down to about 7 steps, right? The first step is reviewing with your customer. And again, what we're looking at is, hey, I am representing a purchaser, right? That's what we're doing right now. We're talking about working with a buyer because that's the most likely scenario as a newer agent, or usually the first one that you're going to work on, right? And so the first is to review the home buying process with your customer and then to search to find them a property. Once you found that property, step 2 is to submit an offer and negotiate. The third step is the deal sheets and contract preparation. The fourth step is signing the contract. The fifth step is mortgage, if there is one, and funding of the purchase. Step 6, again, because we're dealing with condos and co-ops, you're going to have a board approval process. And step 7 is the actual closing and getting down to actually, getting your customer into the property. Now, when I go through these, in the top right-hand corner, you're going to see basically who is what I would call, and again, I'm not big into sports analogies, but who you might call the quarterback here, right? In this case, the broker, right? Who is leading the process? Throughout the whole thing, we are representing our customer, and our job is to make sure that everything is happening as it's supposed to happen, and that we are brokering the transaction, right? We're helping to facilitate. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily always in charge, but we need to know who is in charge and make sure that that person is doing their job. And if they're not, we need to kind of remind them to do it, right? And so again, whoever you see highlighted in the top right corner of the steps, that's who I feel like is in charge of that, right? So in this case, broker is referring to you, right? Whenever I say broker, I mean agent. They're used interchangeably, right? So the first step, when you have a new customer, when you have a new buyer that you're working with, is to do the buyer consultation. How many of you have completed a buyer consultation so far? No? Have you done one yet? No. No? No? Who of you have looked at the buyer consultation, right? Did you do it during Power Ups? Did you guys go over the buyer consultation? So you've at least seen it, right? And so again, Weichert has a really great buyer consultation, which is a review of process. Kind of like we're going over right now, how to work with a buyer. You need to be able to talk to a buyer about what the process of purchasing a home looks like. And so during the buyer consultation, which again is a separate training chapter, that's kind of your homework for tonight, is to watch the buyer consultation video that I have on the YouTube channel and go through it and start to review it yourselves, right? So make sure that you guys mark that down, watch the buyer consultation video, go through it and go through the packet yourself. So during that presentation, what we're doing is we're reviewing what they want, right? What does this customer want? We're also taking the time at the buyer consultation to make sure that we have sent to them all of the forms that we need to in SkySlip, right? When we're representing a buyer, before we take them out, we should have them sign these 4 forms. Sometimes that's not feasible. So when you take them out the first time, you bring them with you. And if you forgot to bring them with you, you have them sign after the first showings, right? New York state law requires that at first substantive contact, which is you taking someone out, you get these signed, right? So if you do not get these 4 forms signed, the agency disclosure form, the fair housing disclosure form, the RESPA, and the wire fraud notice, you can get in trouble, right? And my best practice is that you do it the first time you meet with them. When you do the buyer consultation, I always stick these at the end of the buyer consultation, or you send it to them before you take them out, right? Again, you will not get into trouble probably if you don't do it before you take them out, but if you put in an offer without having these signed, you can lose your license, right? So you need to have these signed as quickly as you can. They're very easy to go over, and again, we'll go over that during that video that you watch on the buyer consultation, right? But again, it's the agency disclosure form, letting them know that you're representing them in their best interest. The fair housing disclosure form, letting them know how they could be discriminated against and how to report that if they feel like they were. The RESPA form, which lets any buyer know that Weichert has a real estate insurance company as well as a real estate mortgage company associated with us. Not that they have to use them, but we have to disclose them when we have them, right? If you don't tell one of your buyers that we have an insurance company and mortgage company, and they find out and they didn't know that, they could sue you, right? For fair housing violation. You did not tell them that you have these services, right? That's why we have this form signed. And the wire fraud notice. Again, you don't want people to lose money. Again, it happened a lot over the last 5 years where people wired money to somebody they didn't even know. They were in a real estate transaction. They lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So make sure that you're getting the sign so you're not liable for any of that. A couple other things that you do during the buyer consultation. Again, I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of this right now, but you want to introduce the revenue financial statement, right? That is an asset liability form that goes over how much money they have and where they have that money, right? What does this do? This makes sure that someone who's looking at co-ops actually has the 10, the 20, the 25, the 30% down that the co-op might need, right? It's introducing them to a real estate attorney, right? If they don't have one, you want to introduce them to one from the get-go. If they do have one, your next step should be to call them and introduce yourself. This is a teammate, and again, as we get through the process of buying a condo or co-op, you're going to see that the real estate attorney really plays an important role, and you need to be in a good relationship with them, right? If you're not in a good relationship with them, they can totally mess up the deal. Introduction to the mortgage broker. Again, we have Doug in-house. If they have their own, call and introduce yourself to them, right? After your first time going out, after the buyer consultation, you want to know the whole team because you guys are going to be working intimately together on this deal. Again, during that buyer consultation, you also want to direct their search, right? Tell them about the site they can look on, right? You know, if you have someone who's looking in New York and looking on, you know, if they're looking in Manhattan, they're looking on realtor.com, they're probably missing out on a lot. Why? Because we're not realtors here in New York City. Most of you guys, none of you are realtors, right? We are all members of Redme. It's not part of Realtor. Our listings from Redme do not appear on realtor.com, right? So that's something that, again, you can direct them where they should be looking. And if they see something online that they want to see, send it to you. You can get them into any property that's on the market. Again, this is a very brief overview of what you go through during the buyer consultation. And so make sure that you've looked through that, you know, in the next day or so. So again, the other things that you do during the review, right? You want to review their pre-approval verification, make sure that they can afford what you're taking them out to see. Again, it should have the price, down payment, and terms on it, right? Make sure that it's for the right property. You might have someone who is pre-approved, let's say by Rocket Homes, a lead that you got from Rocket. That person might have a pre-approval for a single family home, but all they can afford is a co-op, right? So they need to go back to Rocket and have that pre-approval form changed to be for a co-op. Again, if they don't have a pre-approval, that's totally fine. Introduce them to White Group Financial or ask about introducing them to a mortgage broker you can work with, right? So again, then you're going to take them out, right? You guys know how to do that. It's very similar to the rentals. Set appointments, confirm them, take them out, show them stuff. An important thing to do is get feedback after every showing that you're doing, right? What did you think? You don't have to do it right away. Do it the next day. It's a reason to be in touch with them, right? And I always keep track on a Google Sheet everything that I'm seeing with my customer, right? Why do I do that? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it keeps me organized. I know every single thing I showed them, when we saw it, what they thought about it, right? I share the Google Sheet with them for them, so they know everything that we've seen, right? They can keep notes as we're on the go, right? They have a little thing. They don't have to be like, oh, what's the price of this? What's the common charges? What's whatever. Before I go out, I have it all in a little spreadsheet, right? They share it with them. I say, hey, this is what we're seeing today. They're like, great. They look at it. They can take notes in as we go along, so stuff doesn't get forgotten. And again, the other thing that we can do there is, let's say you take them out one weekend. You follow up with them, they don't respond. You follow up the next week, they're like, oh, actually, I'm still interested in 123 Main Street. Well, you can be like, unfortunately, 123 Main Street's already in contract, right? And you keep track on your Google Sheet what's happening with the properties that they seem to like, right? That way you can show people what's going on with the market. That's part of our job, is to keep people prepared, right? Again, how fast things are going, right? For the rentals, you probably take someone out and something they like, they don't make the move within, you know, a couple hours, it's going to be rented, right? And that happens. And you can show the same thing to buyers so that they understand what's going on with the speed of the market, especially for well-priced properties. And it will make it so that they're probably more likely to put in an offer when they need to, right? We really want to keep them going.
Do you have like a sample of this sort of machine that you would have? So you can break it down?
Sure. So Aiden asked for a sample. I'm going to stop the share for a second. Oop, let me show you an example of one.
Interested in job.
Okay. Who's it for? Harris, okay, cool. I'm Jason. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
You too. Okay, so. Here's one. So here's, oh, let me share my screen so you can see it, Kathy. So again, this is a very, share the whole thing. This is a very simple example of it, right? This is for someone that we were just starting to look at properties, right? We didn't actually go out and see anything. She would send me stuff, right? I would put stuff on here. And she would put notes, right? Hates, likes layout, hates finishes, right? This is from a pre-going out phase. For, let me find another one. Again, it's a very, very basic. You can do whatever works for you. Let me see another one. Here we go. So address, apartment, asking price, sales history, square footage, price per square foot, days on market, notes, right? And again, we went around and we saw all these properties, right? So this was the first day that we went out, the first 2 days that we went out to see these properties, right? Again, it's a really great way to collaborate, right? That way, if this is shared with this customer, and if the customer finds something, instead of having all these emails back and forth, he can just pop it in, he or she can just pop it in, right? If there are 3 people, you can all be on the same page, right? It's a nice way to keep organized. You can do the same thing with rentals, right? When I took rental clients out, I did the same thing too. So again, something you can do to keep yourself organized. It's just an easy way. And again, you can keep it as basic, or for rentals, maybe it's like address, apartment, rent, days on market. That's it, right? You're not going to have square footage for most rental properties, or notes, right? I put in building notes: doorman, elevator, no gym, doorman, elevator, gym, pool on roof, whatever it was, right? So again, these are just ways to kind of keep yourself organized. Go back to the. Sorry, hold on a second. Where is this one? Go back. Second. Again. Stuff in here. What's going on here? I gotta reload this, and I'll do it again. Sorry about this. PowerPoint is not working. Let's give it a second. Just gonna pause the video for 1 second. Okay, so sorry about that. So again, one thing that you won't see on here in these kind of review and search, at least for me, is the inspection, right? And the reason for that is that the purpose of an inspection, and again, if someone is purchasing a single family home or a multifamily home, I would 100% recommend them doing an inspection. Why? Because an inspector checks out the building and what I would call the systems of the building: the water heater, the heater for, like, there's like a gas heater or a boiler or whatever it is, the roof, if it's a townhouse with an elevator, the elevator, those kind of systems of the building. And your buyer in a single family home or multifamily home inherits everything that's there, right? The bad roof, the bad insulation, whatever it is. When someone is purchasing a condo or co-op, really they're only talking about the interior elements of the building, right? They're talking about the insides of their apartment. And so an inspection, which can cost upwards of $750 to $1,200, really the only thing an inspector can check out in a condo or a co-op, for the most part, is the faucets on the sink and maybe the bathroom, right? So you're literally paying someone, in my opinion, to turn on the appliances, which I can do as a broker, to turn on the faucet, which they can do themselves too, right? Some people want to do it no matter what. Totally fine, right? If they want to do it, they can do it. If they want to do it, they should do it before the offer is submitted or between the offer being submitted and then signing the contract, right? What we say in New York is that the inspections are usually for informational purposes. Again, today we're just talking about condos and co-ops. There's really not that much that's going to come up during an inspection of a condo or co-op, right? We pretend like this, our office is a condo or co-op. The only thing they can really test is the sink, right? Maybe the bathroom. Flushes, great. That's all they can do, right? They can't go into the pipes. They can't do certain things. So again, that's kind of why if someone asks, and again, whatever they want to do, you let them do, right? If they say I want an inspection, great, let me give you some inspectors, right? We have a bunch of them. But for me, it's like all we can really do is turn on and off switches. We can do that before you sign the contract and save yourself a couple $100. So that's why. But again, if your client says I really want to do an inspection, great. If you're doing a house or a multifamily, 100% recommend it. But for a condo or co-op, because again, the building, right? The elevator, the roof, the boiler are usually for the entire building. And the attorney during the due diligence phase, which we'll talk about, is going to be the one who's kind of looking into that and making sure those are up to date, right? That those have been budgeted for and things like that. So, does anyone have any questions about this phase, right? So again, you do the buyer consultation with them, you take them out, you show properties. Very similar to what you're going to do with the rental process. Any questions?
If funding the team on the apartments, we'll pay for that.
During an inspection, if someone finds something wrong with the apartment, who will pay for it? That's all part of the negotiation, right? So in my mind, I would rather know the condition of something before I put in an offer. And so if they want to do an inspection, I always tell people, my clients, I say, do it before we put in an offer, right? That way we can use the inspection to say, I want, $50,000 off because X needs to be fixed. But before you put the offer in. In New Jersey, for instance, they do the inspection after the offer is accepted, and then they try to reduce the price down. I always say I'd rather negotiate fully knowledgeable about everything and then not have to have a seller who agrees to one price, and then you're asking for more money. For me, that's a recipe to do it, but people do it different. So again, if something's wrong, it's negotiated who quote unquote pays for it or how it's handled.
Does it have to be legit though? Because sometimes somebody might say something like they just don't like something rather than it needs to be fixed.
Yeah, well, an inspector is going to be looking at if we're talking about an inspector, they have like a certain standard, so they have to use those things. Again, someone could go into an apartment and basically state like, oh, I hate the wallpaper. Who cares, right? Like that's not like an actual part of the property. So okay, let's keep going to step 2, right? Oh, sorry, this is just again an overview. This is what the buyer consultation looks like. It's in the Google Drive. You can download it. It's available on Whitebird One as well. And this is what a revenue financial statement looks like. Again, an asset liability statement. We'll get to this a little bit more down the road. Oh, I guess we'll talk about it now. So why do we introduce the revenue financial statement, right? And again, this is also available in the Google Drive. There's a PDF and a Excel version. I like to use the Excel version because you can type into it and it's very simple. It'll add everything up for you. What it is an asset liability statement, right? Everyone has certain money that they have in various assets and they have liabilities. They have debt, they have student loans, they have credit card loans and whatever, right? So this statement helps people put together on 2 sheets of paper what they're worth, right? What their net worth is, right? And again, if you've never done this, it's a fun exercise to do, right? Calculate your net worth, right? You can go through, you can do it for yourself and say, okay, this is what my net worth is, right? It has sources of income, monthly expenses and things like that. And really what the nitty gritty of this is getting to is what is the person's debt to income ratio, right? What a debt to income ratio looks at is monthly expenses, outlays versus monthly income, right? And most co-ops have a maximum amount of money, right? That can be their debt to purchase in that building, right? So again, we're going to use an example down here, but most co-ops have a maximum debt to income ratio, right? 25%, 30%, 33%, right? And so what we do is we add up all debt payments, right? So again, if they have credit card debt, student loans, car payment, stuff like that, plus the mortgage, right? Whatever the expected mortgage is on whatever they're buying, plus the maintenance or common charges and taxes of whatever they're buying, and divide it by their monthly payment or their monthly salary, right? So for instance, if someone has $200 in student loans, they want to purchase a property with a $2,600 mortgage and a $1,600 maintenance, and they make $14,000 a month, right? Then their debt to income is 31.4%, right? So even though they're only paying $4,400 a month on all their loans, if the building says it has to be under 30, they probably won't get approved by that board, right? So again, it could be borderline for a 30% co-op, right? And again, if you have questions, what is the debt to income ratio? Who do you think you should ask about that?
The seller's broker.
There you go. Kathy got it. The seller's broker, right? Any questions you have about someone or about the policies of the building, your expert until you've sold in the building is the seller's agent, right? So if you have someone that you think might be questionable, you can ask them, what is the debt to income ratio for this building? Is there a maximum debt to income ratio for this building? Whatever it is, you can ask the seller broker, right? OLR will give you a lot of information about the minimum down payment, right? The minimum down payment for every co-op and condo is in OLR. So you can find it there. Most of the time, Street Easy has it correctly as well. But most of them don't say what the debt to income ratio is, right? And so that's something important, right? Especially if you have someone in a situation like this, where they're kind of like, again, I would say 30 is usually the highest that most buildings allow. Some in Brooklyn will allow 33%. Again, it's really kind of all over the place, but ask the listing agent. They should be able to answer that for you. And you should have a sense, right? One of the first questions you might get before setting up a showing is, what is their debt to income ratio, right? And so it's something that you should figure out from kind of the get-go. So again, if let's say your client is in this situation, right? Their debt is $4,400 a month, they make $14,000 a month, right? What are the solutions, right? So again, in all of this, we can affect something, right? We can either put more down, right? Because that means the mortgage will be smaller and their debt to income ratio will go down. Or maybe find a lower interest rate mortgage. Again, that would shrink the mortgage amount. Or maybe if they pay off their $200 in student loans, right? Maybe they're like, oh, this is really not that much money. I never thought about paying it off. Maybe if they pay off that $200 a month, their debt to income ratio will go down by enough that will allow them to get through that building, right? So these are all things that can be worked through, and there are solutions to this, right? Again, that's where you maybe go to Doug and talk to him. Hey, how do we get this down? Things like that. Or again, talk to the other broker, talk to me. We can help work out a scenario, right? Maybe it's having their parent sign with them. Their parent makes $1 million a month, and they're okay signing on the loan with them, right? That's going to totally bring down their debt to income ratio significantly. So again, it all depends on what they're buying and why, but that's why it's important, right? Someone who can afford the debt to income ratio allowed, and again, really a condo doesn't have a debt to income ratio maximum. The bank does, right? Usually the banks will only allow a loan up to 40 or 50% of debt to income, but see how much higher that is building, right? So maybe a person buys in a condo, maybe they buy something for a cheaper price. Again, these are all things that we can work out, but that's why it's important to know about debt to income ratios. Okay, so step 2 is we're going to submit an offer and negotiate. And again, as we see up here in the right corner, you, the broker again, agent, is the one who's in charge of this, right? So again, when you found the place, they're like, let's put in an offer. Great, right? So the first offer always has to be in writing, right? And what constitutes an offer, right? It constitutes the terms, which is the price that you're offering, financing, right? What percentage are they financing, right? Standard for most buildings and most banks in New York City is that they will loan up to 80% of the purchase price, right? So again, even if it's a condo that allows 10% down, most banks at certain price points, and most of the price points we have here in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, wherever it is, they want the person to put down 20%, right? That is not to say there are buildings where you can put down 10% and get a loan for 90%. That can totally still happen, right? What are the inclusions, right? What is the closing date? Do they want to close way off in the future? Do they want to close now, right? Again, during Power Up, you'll kind of talk about that, right? That's something you should always be talking to the listing agent about. Hey, when do they want to close, right? Because you can maybe have a better offer based on the closing date and stuff like that. Again, if there are certain things that you want the seller to pay for, right? And this tends to come up if it's what we would call a sponsor unit, right? Or a new development, right? And what is a sponsor unit? A sponsor unit is a unit in a building, right? It can be a condo or a co-op, where the sponsor or the developer, right? Those two names are used interchangeably, is selling that unit for the first time on the open market, right? And again, let's think about this, right? I think most of us live in a rental building, right? So the owner of your rental building could turn your building into a co-op or condo, right? They can do it to either, and this happened across New York City, right? First with condos, co-ops, and then with condos, right? So basically, every unit will become a co-op or condo unit. They would have to offer you the right to buy it first because you live in the building, and then they could sell it on the open market, right? So that's complicated. Let's not get there yet, but basically, when that happens, right, people are offered to purchase it, right? And in some of these units, there were rent controlled or rent stabilized tenants or renters that didn't want to leave, right? And now over time, some of these people are selling, right? For example, Eunice and Stephanie at our office have a lot of units at 25 Parade Place, right? It's a co-op, it converted in the 80s, but they're still selling units now, right? You'll see it all across, right? In the description, we'll say sponsor sale, right? No board approval. That's one of the benefits of a sponsor sale. There's no board approval whatsoever. So some of these debt to income ratios don't matter for a sponsor sale, right? It's something you guys should know. With a sponsor sale or a new development, the expectation is that the buyer, not the seller, will pay the transfer taxes and for the attorney fees of the seller, right? So that adds more to the closing costs, right? There's a benefit because there's no board approval. So you could buy, there could be a co-op where they don't allow financing, and this seller could allow you to get 90% financing, right? Because it's a sponsor sale. So those things can be negotiated, right? The transfer taxes, the attorney. Again, recently I've been negotiating for storage units, right? One of the buyers I'm closing on this week, right? We got the sponsor to pay for the transfer taxes, the mansion tax, the attorney for the sponsor, and we got a free storage, right? So those are things that are negotiable in new developments or sponsor units, right? But if you want them, you have to put them in your offer and put them in the first offer. Don't bring them up down the road, right? The offer should also have the name, address, and kind of some information about the people who are buying, a short bio. Again, at this point, because you've done your job as an agent, they should already have a real estate attorney, right? So include the real estate attorney's info in there. Why would you do that? Because it makes you seem more prepared, right? It makes your buyer seem more prepared to take the next steps. I can't tell you how many times, I've gotten offers on a property, and you can tell who's a good agent and who's not by who's actually put in a full-on offer letter with the attorney's contact with all this stuff in there, right? In addition to this, and again, there are going to be different brokers who ask for offers to be put in different ways, right? And again, there are millions of different ways to put in an offer. Who do you defer to of how they want the offer put in? So the seller, the seller's agent, exactly. Thanks, Aiden. So again, if they say we need this form, right? Say, hey, could you send over that form? I'll use the one that you want me to, right? And fill out the form the way that they want it, right? You always want to defer to the seller's agent for however they want it. But again, this is how we usually prepare it, right? We have a submit offer form. We have, again, I usually just put in the body of an email, which you'll see in the next slide. And usually that's totally fine here on the revenue broker firms. Once you're on LIBOR or One Key or these other places, they usually want a different form, yada, yada. But don't worry about it, right? If they say, hey, we need this form, say, great, send it to me, I'll fill it out. Perfect. Along with the offer, you also need to include with the offer a few pieces of information, right? So if they're getting financing, you need the pre-approval letter, right? So you attach a copy of the pre-approval letter with the offer form. If they're paying cash, you want proof of funds. And what is proof of funds? Proof of funds is a recent screenshot or statement that shows enough money to cover the closing costs, right? So if it's a cash offer, you still need to provide something. You can't just put in a cash offer, right? Because anyone could do that. They want substantive information. They want backup information to see that this person could actually afford to purchase the home, right? And again, I can tell you how many times I've gotten 2 offers at the exact same time. One had everything we needed, one didn't. They had to go back, they had to do all this stuff, and the first offer got accepted because they were prepared, or the buyer's agent was prepared. Now, we also need the revenue financial statement for any offer, right? I always recommend for any offer, especially for any co-ops, even if it's a cash offer, right? And your buyer might say, well, I'm paying cash, why do I need to show anything else? Well, again, in a co-op, there's still board approval, right? And if they're hiding assets or if they're doing something kind of sketchy, they won't get approved by the co-op, right? I've had cash buyers turn down my co-op boards before, right? For various reasons, we don't get into that, but you know, they want people, and the buyer's agent, if they're a good, seller's agent, if they're a good seller's agent, I do not present an offer until I have all this stuff, right? I will not present it to myself because it's not a bona fide offer until you have all this stuff. So save yourself time, save your customer pain of not getting something accepted by having all this together from the get-go, right? That's why I say during the buyer consultation, you have them start filling out the forms so you have it when you need it, right? Again, you put in this offer and we'll see what an offer letter looks like on the next slide. And then you negotiate to accepted terms, right? Again, what number you put in for an offer should be decided by your buyer, right? You should never, ever say, I think we should offer X. They're going to accept Y, right? Our job is to help your buyer with coming up with a number, right? And in this market, usually it's either the asking price or something near the asking price, right? Because there's limited inventory. But what we do is we help present them, right? Here are the last 5 one-bedroom sales in the building, right? I went on Urban Digs, here's the price per square foot for co-ops, 2 bedrooms in Chelsea, right? Whatever it is. We help them and kind of guide them to a range, the exact number they must come up with. And they should text you or email you that number, right? To put into the offer. We should never, again, never ever say, I think the seller will accept X, right? Even if the other broker said, hey, it needs to be 950 and we'll get it accepted, right? Michael had it the other day. The broker flat out just said to him, needs to be 950. What Michael said back to them was, hey, the broker said 950 is the number. I don't know if that'll be accepted, but if you want to go with what he said, put it in, right? Because we should not be liable for something. Again, if you say, I know they're going to accept 900 and they accept 900, then your client might be like, wow, I could have put in 850, right? That's the fear. So make sure that you're doing this to the benefit of your buyer, right? That's who you're representing. You want them to get the best deal. You want them to feel like you help them win. And again, let's say it's the asking price is $1 million. The last sales were 975, but this one's more renovated. You could say, hey, the range in this building is 950 to 1.1 million. This one seems better renovated than the last one. It's on a higher floor. I think it's a fair price. And let them put in the offer, right? When people ask, again, if you look on Redney, if you look on OLR, if you look on StreetEasy, you'll see, well-priced units sell at ask, maybe a little bit over ask, or within, let's say, 5-ish% in a normal market, right? Again, if it's a bad market, maybe a little bit less. If it's been on the market for a while, maybe a little bit less. But usually, again, if I'm working with a seller and we have something on the market and we get an offer, within the first couple of weeks, that's less than 10% off the asking price, I always recommend to my buyer and my seller, again, I'm on the other side here, not to count, right? Because again, if we just came on the market and you're offering us 10% less, it doesn't make any sense for most sellers, right? Why not wait another week or 2 and see what happens, right? So again, time on market also affects how we get to these numbers, and this is all the whole kind of negotiation thing. But one more thing to remember, right? So when you log on to StreetEasy, there's usually a little number in the top left-hand corner when you're logged as an agent, if you're looking at a sale property, of how much commission is being paid, right? When you log on to OLR, which you guys are all members of Revenue, when you go to Revenue, there'll be a co-broker percent, right? But paying 2.5% to buyer agent, paying 3% to buyer agent, 2%, whatever it is. Let's say you're working with a client, and again, you're on Revenue, and now they're looking in Queens, like further out in Queens, not in Astoria or Long Island City, but you're still looking. That tends to be a different board. That's a board called LIBOR and 1P. And so if you find something on Zillow or on any website that's not StreetEasy or OLR, you need to confirm in writing with the seller's agent what commission is being paid to Whiteger for bringing the buyer. In writing, not a text message, in an email, right? Because you could get to the finish line and they're like, oh no, you're not a member of our board, we're not paying you anything, right? And that can happen. The good thing is we're on a bunch of different boards here and agents in the office are on the board, so we can always maybe pivot it, but you can save yourself time and money by getting this confirmed in writing. What percentage are you paying to a buyer's agency, right?
Jason,
Yes,
Jason.
Kathy,
what about Queens? When
that's what we're just talking about.
you said Rebney and thing, I mean,
Queens is LIBOR, that's what I just said. So if you're, again, if you're not a member of LIBOR, then you have to ask them before you show the property.
okay.
Or you can join LIBOR, right? That's the second option.
And what's the second option?
To join the board.
Oh, yeah.
We can be members of both, right? I'm members of 3, right? I'm Rebney, I'm Long Island Board of Realtors, and I'm the Staten Island Board of Realtors, right? There's 3 of us on Staten Island here. There's about 20 of us on LIBOR and the 80 whatever of us are on Rebney. So you can join bar if you want to. It's another few $100s a year basically. But if you find that you're working in Queens, you know, in the Bronx, in Westchester, you know, basically it's everywhere around the city, Long Island, or if you want to work in Staten Island, you get here in that board. So, but just let me know, we can get you on that. Okay, so here's a sample offer, right? And again, this is one I moved around with it. Hi, Jonah, right, the other broker. I'm authorized on behalf of my clients, John Jacobs and Pietro Carlos, to offer 1.7 million for apartment 5 at 44 Sullivan Street, right? There's the basis of your offer. They will be putting down 20% and obtaining financing from Chase Bank for the remaining 80% of the purchase. So what are we talking there, right? Down payment, and I'll send you all these slides too, don't worry. So down payment and financing, right? Again, these days, because sometimes people want you to waive it, I would also include this offers contingent on financing, right? So I just add that in because again, you want to make sure they can get a loan for this, right? They're able to close extremely quickly, right? And then we got to give them the date, and they have an attorney selected. And again, write the attorney's name. They're working with Randy Chang, ready to go, right? Because that, again, that shows that you're prepared. Their pre-approval and revenue form is attached, right? This was all in the same email. Now, in this case, this was, and again, I'm highlighting it in yellow, this was a sponsored unit, right? In a new development. So we wanted them to pay all sponsor building in New York City closings, right? That's part of our initial offer. In the end, we got it, right? Because this was during the pandemic when I made this offer. But Johnny Pietro, a longtime New York City residents, make an amazing addition to the community at 44 Sullivan. They're currently living at 25 Central Park West and excited to make them move back. So thanks so much. Look forward to this. That's an offer in New York State, right? That is a full-on offer. Now, again, you go over this during the buyer consultation, but in New York State, offers are made in good faith and they're not binding, right? In New Jersey, if you went and wanted to buy a house, you'd sign a piece of paper and it's a full-on contract that you put in, right? This is an offer in New York State. So nothing is binding, right? Nothing in New York State is binding until the buyer signs the contract. You know, then again, we'll get to the different spaces, but the buyer signs the contract, puts down down payment, the seller signs the contract, and at that point, once it's delivered back to the buyer, then you're in contract. Right? So anything can happen in between that. And that's why, again, having a good lawyer, a good banker, all these things are important in New York. Okay, so let's say they accept your offer, right? Or you go back and forth, negotiate. You have an accepted offer, right? You're step 3, right? This is where the deal sheet is created and the contract preparation will happen, right? Now, there are 8 million terms used for this same piece of paper, right? And we're going to call it the deal sheet. To me, that's the easiest way to put it, right? It's also called an offer acceptance sheet, a term sheet, offering, whatever, right? So basically, what you will do as representing the buyer is you will send to the seller's agent, once you have an accepted offer, the buyer's information, right? Their name and address, as they want it on the contract, their attorney's name and contact information, and your name, Weigert's address, your contact information, our license number as a company, and your license number as an agent, right? That is your, I'm gonna put this in air quotes, your side of the deal sheet, right? The other side will say, send us your side of the deal sheet. That's what that is. Buyer and their information, their attorney, you and what's this information, right? The buyer's agent sends it to the seller's agent, in the body of an email. That's the easiest way to do it. The seller then completes that deal sheet with all this other information, and then it is forwarded to both attorneys. Let me see if I have an example of one here. This is an example of a deal sheet, right? So I can move this, you can see it a little better. Right, so it has, again, this one was called an offer acceptance sheet. On one side of it, it's all the seller's information. On one side of it, it's all the buyer's information. Right? Has the terms of the deal, all that stuff, right? Again, it will be used by the seller's attorney to draft a contract and by the buyer's attorney to make sure the contract is correct, right? We, in New York State, do not write contracts. We provide information on the deal sheet to the attorneys to then do the contracts, right? So if your client ever says, hey, can you review this contract for me? Your answer should be, unfortunately, I can't. That's what your attorney's for, right? It's important to make sure that they understand you're here to help and make sure that everything's good, but you're not an attorney, right? None of us are attorneys here in Europe. We do not write contracts. We don't really even have much to do with the contract, right? That's why they hire an attorney. Let me go back for a second. Oops. Okay, so while this is happening, and once the deal sheet goes out, right, the attorney will, what we call negotiate the contract, right? The seller's attorney will put together a contract that they have, right? It then gets sent to the buyer's attorney. The buyer will have some issues with it. They'll review those issues with their buyer. They'll go back to the seller's attorney, and they basically do a little back and forth. Kind of like we negotiated, they negotiate a contract, right? During this time, the buyer's attorney will also do what's called their due diligence, right? And the due diligence is basically reviewing all of the information on the building, right? So what do? They look at the offering plan, the building financials, the house rule, the sales packet, the sublease packet. They also usually send out what's called a questionnaire. That's a list of questions, and the attorney that I use sends it's like 8 pages of questions they send to the management company to get answers to things that they want to know about, right? When was the roof done? When was the boiler done? Are there assessments coming up, right? This is kind of like I was mentioning before, the inspection of the financials and of the kind of information on the building itself, right? And again, we're the ones who are kind of in charge of making sure this is kind of going back and forth. While at the same time, the attorneys are the ones who are doing a lot of the work. So the next step is step 4, the contract, right? So the contract's been finalized, the due diligence is done, right? The attorneys did all that stuff. Again, the contract signing is handled by the attorney, right? The buyer's attorney. The buyer, your buyer, will sign the contract and put down the contract deposit. Now, again, there are 2 terms which people tend to kind of coalesce together. There is a contract deposit and there's a down payment, right? Those are 2 different and specific terms. The contract deposit, like the name states, is an amount of money that's put down by the buyer when they sign the contract. And in New York, it's often 10%, right? If someone is putting down less than 10%, it's usually less than 10%. It's usually what they're down, in that case would be what their down payment is, right? If someone's buying, again, let's say they found a condo that allows 5% down, they're buying 5% down, then it would probably be 5%, right? So it's usually not going to be more than they're putting down. This is different than the down payment amount, but it's usually a portion of the down payment, right? So again, in New York for condos co-ops, most of the time people are putting down 20% as a down payment. They are putting down 10% contract deposit, right? So when they sign the contract, they're giving 10% to the attorney, and to the closing table, they're bringing that second 10%, right? So usually the contract deposit is a portion of the down payment. Are there any questions about that? So this is one of the most misused. So again, use the words correctly. Contract deposit is the money they're putting down when they sign the contract. Down payment is the total amount that they are not financing is how you can think of
And
it,
this
right?
is always a mandatory thing, the contract deposit.
Yes, there's always a contract deposit paid because that's what basically binds the buyer
Binds.
into having to actually close, or they could lose the contract. Kathy?
No, I listen.
Okay. So the buyer signs, they put down the contract deposit, the seller signs. At that point, you're fully executed and in contract. As soon as, and again, let me make this even more abundantly clear. The buyer signs, put down the money, the seller signs, and once the seller's attorney returns the contract to the buyer's attorney, that's when you're fully executed in contract, right? Because we've had it happen once in my 15 years of doing this, where buyer signed, seller, buyer then said they didn't want to go forward anymore. And because they hadn't gotten the contract back, it was all canceled. So that can happen. Until they get it back, you're not fully executed. So
The buyer puts down that contract deposit and then just and receives like the confirmation that everything binded and chooses to walk away.
they could lose that deposit. Again, that they could. That's what kind of binds them to the deal. Okay, so let's imagine they're going forward, right? You're fully executed, it was returned. That's when the property is quote unquote off the market, right? So again, if you're working with a seller, you continue to show that property until the day the contract is signed and fully executed, right? Because you never know what's going to happen. Again, until that fully happens, anything could happen. The buyer can walk away, the seller can still entertain offers, right? You know, again, we've had it happen to agents before where they had an accepted offer, they were ready to sign the contract, and the seller's agent came back and said, oh, actually, we just got an offer for 20,000 more. Do you want to match it or are we going to go with it? Right? So that can happen, right? So that's why there's pros and cons to this, like not actually signing a contract when we put in an offer, right? Because you have time to do the due diligence, you have time to back out, but anything can still happen. So it's every system has its own trade-offs, right? And so that's why part of our job is to minimize the time from an accepted offer to the contract signing, because anything can happen, right? If you feel like your client's getting a good deal, you want them to go really quickly to make sure that they get that deal and someone else doesn't swoop in and make a better offer. Questions?
Do I bug the seller agents?
Sorry, you cut out, Kathy. Kathy?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Do I call, once the buyer signs, do I keep calling the seller agent? I'm like, did she sign? Did she sign? Did she sign? Like, do I bug her?
So usually what I would do is I would just send a quick text, hey, buyer just signed and gave the deposit. Let me know when your customer is signing, right?
Okay.
That's it. Pretty simple. Again, because as we see here from the top right in yellow, the attorney is handling all this, right? We want to be there. We want to make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but the attorney is really the one who tells the buyer to sign. Again, you should never say you should sign this contract, right? Again, you're not an attorney. So the attorney should really be the one doing all this, but we make sure, they're ready to sign. We have an idea when they're signing. We tell the other side when they're signing and stuff like that. Check over their silence. Manola's making a joke. Anyways, okay. So the next step is phase 5, the mortgage and funding step, right? This is where the bank sort of takes over. And again, we are still here. The seller's agent is still here to facilitate this, but this is where the bank is in charge, right? So again, if you're doing a cash deal, you skip this, right? And this is also something that again can take a little bit longer compared to a lot of the other phases, right? From looking at houses to finding a house, putting in an offer, negotiating, signing a contract, like from finding a place you want to signing a contract can take about a week, right? It's very short. This can take longer. This can take weeks because the banks can be slow, right? So here's what happens, right? If your person is getting financing, here's kind of the nitty-gritty of what happens backstage with the bank, right? So the first thing is that the mortgage, once you're fully in contract, right? Your buyer, your customer, should send the mortgage officer the fully executed contract, right? If they didn't, you check with them to make sure they did. And if they didn't, you can say, hey, could I send it to your mortgage banker, right? Because you guys already know the bank. Because you already asked who it was, you introduced yourself. So you send them the fully executed contract. Once they have that, they will then order an appraisal, right? And so that appraiser is a third-party person who comes and looks at the home they're buying. And again, this is an appraiser, not an inspector, right? They're having nothing to do with any of the systems. They're coming in with their little camera. They go in for like 5 minutes, they take pictures of everything, make sure, okay, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, boom, it's where it says it's supposed to be, right? And then they do, what an appraiser does is they look at things that have recently sold in the building and in the neighborhood that are similar, and they come up with a price, right? Because they are protecting the bank's interest in giving you a loan, right? They're saying, you know, this is worth the amount you're paying, or near that, or more than that, based on what I'm looking at, comps wise, right? In the same way that we comp a property to give a price to a seller, the bank has their appraiser do it for them as well. So they evaluate the purchase price. If it appraises, keep going, right? Great. If it does not appraise, and it can happen, right? It hasn't happened that often. Again, in the 15 years, I've probably had 3 total or something like that between all the agents in the office that I can remember. If it does not appraise, then either you can get another appraiser if the bank allows it, or they have to go to a different bank, or you renegotiate somehow on appraiser terms, right? And again, if you ever have it where it doesn't appraise, come and find me. I will help you through this, right? It's one of the more complicated parts of our job, right? And again, I had an example where the appraiser, and again, because many appraisers want to come wherever they can get work, you know, we had someone come in from Long Island to do an appraisal on a condo on Charlton, which he appraised for, I think, $250,000 less than it was worth, when our property was $300 per square foot less than anything that had sold in the building, right? The owner was selling it at a loss because we got a really good deal on another property. So it should have appraised for like way more than, and we got it fixed, right? They use the same bank, it got fixed. So it can be fixed, right? So the loan process continues. Your buyer will be sending a bunch of paperwork to the bank. You know, in this phase, again, the bank is in charge. You can help facilitate, right? You'll figure out when the appraiser is coming in. You'll make sure that the seller's agent is working on that, right? You'll make sure all this stuff happens. So usually about 4 weeks after the appraiser, you will get from the bank what's called a commitment letter. That is when the funds are ready to go and the buyer can submit the condo or co-op package. With a commitment letter, when we're talking about a co-op, they also give what's called Aztec recognition agreements, right? This is the 3-way agreement between the bank, the co-op, and the buyer, stating that if the buyer stops paying the loan, that the bank can sell the property with co-op approval, right? So you need all of these for the board package. And so usually, until this phase is done, you cannot submit the condo or co-op board package, which again, that's why it comes after. So steps 5 and 6 can sometimes happen simultaneously, right? And the board process happens, again, with you in kind of control and in charge of doing this, as well as with the management company. So a board package is prepared by the buyer's agent in coordination with the buyer. It has to be reviewed by the selling broker before it's submitted. And again, every building's gonna have a different board package. We have separate training on board packages, right? Watch that when you get to it. You know, one of the first things you'll want to do when you have an accepted offer with a customer is ask the seller's agent for the board package, right? Which is part of the due diligence. That way you can know what they're going to have to prepare down the road and kind of start getting it ready. So the package is reviewed by the management company and then forwarded to the board. The board either asks for more info or potentially for an interview. And again, if the one thing that tends to take the longest in the board package is to get references collected for someone. And so we usually ask for those as soon as you're in contract. But again, we'll go over all this once you got a condo or co-op in contract or going into contract. Let me know. We'll review all this together. There's a whole nother training on how to do the board package. Some of them are done virtually, some of them are done other places, but we won't go into too many specifics on that. So for co-ops, usually there's a board interview that is scheduled by the management company. It's still virtual these days all the time. It's a time for the board to get a good sense of the applicant off paper, personality, interest, if they're crazy or not. Again, these tend to be for co-ops. but there are condos that do have a board interview. Then you hopefully get board approval, right? Again, if you are buying a sponsor unit or from a new development, there is no board approval, right? You can be buying in a co-op, right? That has the worst board in the world and with lengthy board package. And if you buy a sponsor unit, you don't have to go through anything. And so that's why sometimes if you're working with someone who does not have a lot of funds, does not meet certain criteria of the building, if you can find a sponsor unit, or again, we'll say no board approval sponsor unit in that building, you can kind of get around all the tubes, right? There are buildings, again, there's some near my apartment in Greenwich Village where they do not allow students to buy in the building because they want people who are working. It's near NYU, and there are sponsor units that come up where parents can just buy for their kids, right? And they get around those rules. So again, if it's a new development, you skip all this stuff, you don't have to do it. If it's a sponsor unit, you skip all this stuff, you don't have to do it. Okay, so condo and co-op approval, and what does it mean exactly, right? And I think this is very important for you to be able to kind of talk through with any buyer that you're working with, right? So what we say, a condo has the right to board approval, right? Condo boards have what's called the right of first refusal. And what a condo board does is they sign a piece of paper waiving their right of first refusal for the sale. And what does that mean in actuality, right? The board has the option to meet the sale price and the terms of the sale, or to allow the buyer to buy. Those are the only options. They can't say no, this buyer can't buy. They can say, we want to buy this, or we don't want to buy, right? That's the right of first refusal. Why would they ever do this, right? You know, again, the only reason that I've heard this ever happening is, okay, let's say, again, you know, there's a condo unit, all the units sell for $1 million, right? You know, Manolo owns a unit in there and he's in dire straits, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna sell this for $500,000. I don't care, I can lose the money. That $500,000 sale is going to mess up all the other units in the building, right? Because now the sale price comps, when the appraiser comes in, is $500,000, not $1 million, right? So what can the board do? They could say, you know what, we're gonna buy these. And it's happened in New York City before where the board bought the unit in order for it not to sell on the open market for a less price. They waited a year or two and sold it down the road, they actually made money. That price is it doesn't have, so again, let's say you want to sell to your cousin for a cheaper price, the board can say, no, we're gonna buy it for the price. Yeah, so it's a way to stop people from undercutting the value of the building, right? So they have the right to. Yeah. Okay, in a co-op, right? A co-op has the right to accept or reject something. Nothing with right of first refusal usually. They can reject for any reason they want to. They will never give you a reason why they're rejecting because it opens them up to litigation, right? And you might say, why would they reject? Well, we've gotten to the bottom of a few of them, right? And these are the ones that we've dealt with over the last, few years. One is that the purchase price was too low, right? I had a buyer who was buying a building on the Upper East Side during the pandemic. The price, the last sale in the building was $315. We had a contract for $298, and they rejected it. So we got to the bottom of it, and we went back. What did we do? We changed the sale price to $315, and they got a $15,000 credit at closing. So we basically matched the price the board wanted. And again, you will see a lot of times, right? Let's say there's a unit in the building that is, you might see a unit that's been on the market for a while, and then you see the price go up. And some buildings, they will turn down an offer, and the seller will then increase the price to make sure that the board's gonna be happy with the price. Right? So your client who goes in, whenever you're selling a co-op, you have to let them know there is a minimum price that this building will probably allow to happen. Right? And there are ways we can work around that price by changing closing credits and renovation credits and all this stuff. But there's probably a minimum price because the board will just say no, and they can reject it for whatever reason. They won't tell us, but they're just gonna say no. I had one, again, Suzanne and I had a customer, the building thought this person was too much of a celebrity, did not want them to buy. Again, illegal because that's their job, but that's what we found out. Some buildings do not want parents to gift to their children, right? Giving the down payment, giving whatever, even though they say they do. They said that we found out that there were, according to this building, too many kids in the building now. Again, illegal, but we found out. So they wanted certain financing, or they were trying to maintain the building at a certain owner occupancy, right? They did not want someone who was going to use it as a pied-a-terre to buy in the building because they wanted more people who were going to be there to help shovel outside the building, to help run the boards, do all these things, right? So they wanted more, even though the building allows pied-a-terres, they were saying no, they were rejecting pied-a-terre buyers. So it's crazy, again, it's stressful, but it's all I understand. No, that's a different thing, like giving. That's an inheritance question versus a sale question. So that's different. That's different. You can transfer a condo to a family member without them paying, without the board taking. That is okay. Okay, yeah. Any questions about this? Oh, sorry. Pied-a-terre means feet on ground. It's a French term. It basically means when you purchase a home in a city that you don't live in all the time to use when you're here, right? Let's say your uncle in Sardinia wants to have an apartment in New York, and then he's going to come twice a year, and it's just empty the rest of the time. That's a pied-a-terre. Yeah, it means feet on land. So it's just like the home here, so you can have all your crap here in New York. You don't have to stay there all the time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Okay. Step 7 is the closing, right? You get through board approval, congratulations. The bank is then made aware of board approval, right? You can tell them, the attorneys can tell them, the customer can tell them. They usually take about 8 to 10 days to get what's called a clear to close, right? Once they have board approval, you tell the bank then goes through all what they need to do. They get their last documents together, and they will come back and say, we have it clear to close. And at that point, the attorneys will schedule the closing, right? I make this very specific because, again, we get to this point and you're like, let's close tomorrow. And your buyer's like, let's close tomorrow. And you tell the attorney, let's close tomorrow. And then the seller's like, let the attorneys deal with it, let the attorneys deal with it, right? Because there are more parties involved. The condo or co-op also has an attorney that has to be involved. And so let the attorneys deal with it, right? Everyone wants to close, everyone wants to get paid, everyone, wants this over with. It's taken months longer than you expected it to, as Brian can talk to. And again, closing scheduled by the attorneys. So a final walkthrough will happen, right? And a final walkthrough will happen with the buyer and the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, usually the morning of the closing. Again, usually closings are like between 11 and 2, either the morning of or a night or two before, right? For example, I'm going to a walkthrough tonight for closing out on Thursday because the buyer's not available tomorrow. So it can happen earlier than that. Closing happens, right? We usually don't go to it. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And after the closing, right? The closing is basically where they sign over their lives, everyone gets paid, and you walk away with a check. Again, these days we usually get wired funds. If not, you go, you pick up the check, you bring it in, and you send it to commissions. Again, closing gift, right? So you always want to get your customer something, a thank you for using you. I always say don't bring it to the closing. Bring it to their new house like a week or two later. Like, oh my God, I forgot it. Like, let's schedule a time so you can go see it. You can follow up with them. Again, you want to stay top of mind. This is when you ask them for their reviews. They love you so much that they're just closed on it, right? So ask them for the review. Again, do just sold marketing, right? If you sold in the building, you love the building. Start sending to other people. Hey, I just dropped your neighbor in apartment 3. I'd love to bring in neighbors. Let me know if you're thinking of yourself, right? Use all these things as ways to kind of brand yourself. And that's it, right? That's it. That's the whole process, right? It's actually pretty simple, right? There's a lot that goes into each step, but the steps themselves are pretty simple. And once you get the hang of it, to me, and again, I mean, Brian's a really good person to talk about this. It's like doing a really expensive rental, right? If you think of it that way, there's a little more legwork that goes into it, but it's a really expensive rental, and you make a lot more money. So it's more fun. I totally agree with that. So, okay, does anyone have any more questions? Kathy, anything?
No, thank you so much, Jason. It was amazing.
And again, there is a video up on the YouTube channel with this for single and multifamilies. Again, very similar. But you know, what I'd like for you guys to all do is really go over the buyer consultation, because that will help you be able to explain this process to a buyer. And once you can do that, we will give you buyer reviews, right? And again, Brian did it very quickly. You know, think of it as a really expensive rental, but you can take people out. And again, it's a very easy way to get into it, but you must be able to explain this whole process to me and do the buyer consultation with me to explain it to me as a buyer, and then you can get buyer reviews. So it's not that much work you have to do to get them. So, okay, thank you guys so much. I'm gonna
Thank you.
stop this.